This is chapter 16, section Roman numeral 2, the decline of absolutist Spain in the 17th century. The last time we heard about Spain, they were fighting the War of Spanish Succession and losing, starting with Charles II, the last Habsburg ruler of Spain, who died without children, and his will had left Spain allegedly to the grandson of Louis XIV, this guy named Philip of Anjou. The rest of Europe came together and said that's too much power for France to control both France and Spain. The map changed slightly. The great powers, the Grand Alliance, defeated France and Spain, shifted some minor territories around, gave Spain over to Philip of Anjou, who becomes known as King Philip V of Spain. He's the first Bourbon king of Spain, and the dynasty changes, but it's on its way out. It's in decline. Spain is never going to recover the same kind of prestige or status or glory that they had in the golden age of Spain, which was the 1500s or the 16th century, when they were conquering the world and all the gold and silver was flowing in from the New World, and they were running the slave trade, and they were at the peak of their power. From this point on, once the Habsburgs are out and the Bourbons are in, it's a slow decline into relative obscurity. And we really won't talk about Spain after this point until the 20th century again. So this is the last you'll hear of Spain, basically for a while. On an interesting side note, I want you to know that there is still a king of Spain, and he's still a Bourbon. So he's Philip VI. There's Philip V, the first Bourbon king of Spain. And here is the current Bourbon king of Spain, Philip VI, 5, 6. Looks like a businessman. He's about 45 years old, and he's the king of Spain, and that dynasty has been on the throne with some interruptions since the switchover. Okay, let's get into the thesis statement on the decline of Spain. The lack of a middle class, many agricultural crises, population decline, the failure of the Spanish government to invest in productive enterprises, intellectual isolation, being separate from everybody else, and psychological malaise. That means just a general sense of just going in the wrong direction and not working very hard, all contributed to the decline of Spain. This is the main idea here. So, over the 1600s, the 17th century, Spain begins to fade away. Spanish absolutism, which was all the Habsburgs and these first Bourbons, was based, as we know, on colonies and the expansion to the New World and the influx of precious metals that came with that, the gold and silver. Over time, the Dutch and the English began to cut in to the Spanish dominance of trade, Atlantic trade. So the Dutch, the English. So Spanish trade fell about 60% between 1610 and 1650. So the Dutch ships get better, the English trade gets stronger, and the Spanish don't have a monopoly on this anymore. Okay? Also, the workers in the New World, that the slaves basically that the Spanish had taken and put to work for them, just as you know, became very sick with all the diseases that came from the Spaniards. So their workforce in the colonies was dying out. 4. Economic decline. Eventually, the gold and silver itself ran out. They took everything. The Spanish took it all. They basically carved the country dry of precious metal, and then they ran out of, and then that was it. It dried up. So Spain develops this huge, in the process, had spent incredible sums of money coming from the New World, all that gold and silver. They'd racked up this huge bill, and now they can't pay it because the silver coming across the Atlantic has run dry. So the Spanish monarchs declare bankruptcy 5 times. Bankruptcy. They can't pay their debt. There's a small middle class in Spain. Middle classes are the business classes that run businesses and start businesses. There really isn't one in Spain. Okay? There's a few rich at the top, and there's lots of peasants at the bottom. This is kind of like the old Middle Ages system still in effect. Many Spaniards chose unproductive professions as well. There was kind of a negative aspect of being a middle-class business owner. People thought that was dirty. Remember, the Catholic Church for many years had taught that making money and being in banking and money lending was really a dirty profession. So that hasn't changed that mentality. It's changed in Italy, but not in Spain at this point. So unproductive professions, like lots of people were monks and joined monasteries, and those are great for religion, but they're not good for contributing to the economy of a nation. So there's just a lot of choices made that helped to cause Spain to fall apart. Lots of inflation as well, right? That means prices are rising as that silver comes in and the prices go up, and then the silver runs out and people can't pay for anything anymore. And the nobles of Spain all tried to raise taxes on peasants and increase rents and basically just take this whole thing out on the lower classes, as is often the case. The political leaders of Spain, the kings, are even worse. The description of these guys in the textbook is actually pretty priceless, and I feel like I have to read it to you here. Their most Catholic majesties, the kings of Spain, had no solutions to these dire problems. If one can discern personality from pictures, the portraits of Philip III, Philip IV, and Charles II, hanging in the Prado, the Spanish National Museum in Madrid, reflect the increasing weakness of the dynasty. Their faces, the small beady eyes, the long noses, the jutting Habsburg jaws, and the pathetically stupid expressions tell a story of excessive inbreeding and decaying monarchy. There you go. Let's look at these guys. Here's Philip III. He takes over for, actually he was in, Philip III here. Philip IV, remember these guys. There's Philip IV again. Wow, what an outfit. These are the kings of Spain at this point, leading up to the War of Spanish Succession. Look at that outfit, my goodness. There he is again, Philip IV. Pathetically stupid expressions, got it? And here he is again. Now these guys were obsessed with their image, but they look so foolish. They actually liked they called them court dwarfs that were hanging around the royal palace. And they wanted to be painted with these guys. They were like little jesters, almost for amusement. And of course, you put a small person in a picture with you, and it makes the king of Spain look much bigger and more powerful and manly. So this is just, you can tell. The textbook was right. These guys, by the portraits they have, they look like they don't know what is going on. Plus, there's lots of wars being fought. As we know, the 30 Years' War, the Spanish lose, the Habsburgs lose, and then the War of Spanish Succession, they lose that. So they lose a series of wars. The kings are terrible. They go extinct. The Habsburgs are out. The Bourbons switch in. By 1659, in this treaty called the Treaty of the Pyrenees, Spain is finished as a great power. That treaty's not very important. Don't worry about it, but just it's the idea that they had to give away some things. And this is it. Military glory fades. They've lost their wars. The golden age has come to an end. They start to reject progressive ideas. Anything coming from like England or the Netherlands about improving the life of people or moving forward politically, any modernizing, all those are rejected because they come from Protestant countries, and Spain is still super Catholic. So any kind of modern beliefs are fully rejected just simply because they're from a Protestant foreign nation. So Spain is just moving in the wrong direction. There's a pervasive attitude of pessimism and fatalism in the country, which means you just let it be. There's nothing we can do about our situation. I'll read you another quote about this pessimism and fatalism thing. In the reign of Philip IV here, a royal council was appointed to plan the construction of a canal linking two rivers in Spain. After a long debate, the committee, the royal council, declared that if God had intended the rivers to be connected, he would have made them so. So that just sort of like, there's c'est la vie. There's nothing we can do about life. We're just going to sit back. This all gets expressed in one of the greatest books of all time, Don Quixote, this incredible novel by Miguel de Cervantes, who the whole book kind of parallels Spanish society at this point. The main character, his name is Don Quixote, lives in this world of dreams, traveling around, seeking glory. He's kind of delusional. He thinks he's great, but he's really just in decay. He lives in this fantasy world, almost unreality. He fights windmills. He sees windmills. He thinks windmills are his great enemy, so he's fighting windmills in his mind. So just this the book just kind of perfectly captures this decaying society that used to be great and isn't anymore. And the word chaotic means idealistic but impractical. So you hear that word today as people with a great idea, a grand idea that sounds great but absolutely impossible to accomplish. So that word has come down into the modern society. All right, let's move forward here. The next section is a section called Constitutionalism in England. This is the second major form of government now discussed in this chapter. The first was absolutism, prevalent in France and declining in Spain. And now we shift totally up into Northern Europe where they're moving in a whole different direction, a direction known as constitutionalism. And this is really important. So we got to define some terms here. It's all happening at the same time as everything else. This is the 1600s, same time as Louis XIV, same time as Spain going down the toilet. And now up in England, they're getting stronger, but there's going to take some major events to get them there. So constitutional government is limitation of government by law. It implies a balance of authority between the government and the rights of subjects. Balance between authority of government and rights of subjects. A constitutional system can have a written constitution like we do in America, or an unwritten constitution like in England. There actually isn't one document where all their rights and limitations of the government are laid out. It's just sort of tradition and custom. A constitutional system can be a republic where you have representatives that represent you in the government, like the Congress or the Parliament. Or it can be a monarchy, like in England, a constitutional monarchy where there's a sovereign and a parliament. So there's a lot of different shades of constitutionalism here. We kind of have to know it's not just one thing. But basically it implies that the government just can't do whatever it wants, and that you as a citizen or a subject have certain rights. That's the main gist of it. It doesn't have to be a democracy or a constitutional system. So not all people have to participate in the system. Not everybody has a voting right yet. But that's all in the future, where we have democracy and voting. Not yet. This is certain people have rights, and the government as a whole can't just do anything it wants arbitrarily. All right? That's the definition of constitutionalism. Let's go into the story of England here. The decline of royal absolutism in England. This is essentially what I'm going to tell you now. The story is a 70, 80-year story from about 1603 until 1688. So that's the period of time we're looking at. And the main ideas are it's a conflict, this 80-year period, between the kings of England and the Parliament of England over several major issues. Just put this on the side of the notes on middle of page 11 here. It's a conflict between the kings and the Parliament over sovereignty, over power. Who really runs England? Second, a conflict over the form of government. The kings of England are trying to uphold absolutism, and the Parliament is trying to shift away from that. Third, it's a conflict over taxes and finances, and how they're raised and who approves them, where they come from, and who manages them. Fourth, a conflict over religion. There's going to be religion mixed up in England here. Are we going to be the Church of England still, started by Henry VIII, which is Protestant? Are we going to be moved back to Catholicism, which is what some of these kings want to do, go back to the Catholic Church? And then what do we do with these Puritans, the Calvinists up in England that have been causing some trouble everywhere in Europe since Martin Luther's time and shortly after? So there's three main religious groups up in England, and they're all going to get mixed up together. And the last part of the conflict here is about military control. Who really runs the military of England, and who controls the army? Is there a standing army? All of that. So get those things written down. The main points of the story here of constitutional development in England are about the conflict in those 5 issues. So let's get into the details now. James I is the new king of England after Queen Elizabeth I. Queen Elizabeth I was the last Tudor monarch, queen of England, and she was known as the Virgin Queen, and she was never married, and she didn't have any kids. So the Tudor dynasty came to an end with Elizabeth, and who replaced her was the King of Scotland, the son of Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, who Elizabeth had executed for treason. Because Elizabeth died without a kid, ironically, the dynasty passes to the Stuarts. Scotland's Stuart dynasty takes the throne. So the son of Mary Queen of Scots, who Elizabeth killed, replaces Elizabeth on the throne of England. And one of these great ironies of politics and monarchy. This is why people in America down the road are going, we can't have a monarchy. Look at what kind of crazy stuff happens when you have a monarchy. You get that. So when America is formed in 1776, they go, no, we can't have this kind of thing. We need a president. And of course, they wrote that into our Constitution. So James Stuart, James the First of England, there's his dates of reign. Very different from Queen Elizabeth. He was, first of all, he was Scottish, had a thick Scottish accent. Scottish. He was a bad judge of character, they say. He hated commoners. He was unapproachable, inaccessible. He was called the Great Pretender, like a phony. And the people of England never took to James the First, ever. He was a strong believer in the divine right. He was trying to turn England from, remember Queen Elizabeth was good. She was Machiavellian and sophisticated, and most people liked her, and she beat the Spanish Armada and was really popular. This guy comes in and the whole thing goes down. Wants to be an absolute monarch, okay? The divine right, willing to violate people's property and take away due process, which means any of their rights, and violate all those things. He wrote a little pamphlet, a little manifesto called The True Law of Free Monarchy, in which this is his political theory in which he defended absolute monarchy as the perfect form of government. So that's all great, but in England there's still a parliament, and the House of Commons is the main body of that parliament, and the House of Commons isn't going to go along with any of these ideas of James I. Because remember, the House of Commons always in England had controlled finances and taxes going back to the 100 Years' War. They got that right. Remember that. James I, of course, and all kings are in need of money and taxes and finance. That's the number one thing a king of England, of any king, needs. And the Parliament controlled that. And what they wanted is more sovereignty, more power. They don't like the direction he's taking the country. So this is the fundamental conflict. It's going to play out starting with taxes. Plus, James I was a really extravagant king and had this incredible lifestyle that he wanted paid for by the Parliament. Lots of art, lots of palace building. He had lots of public flaunting of his mistresses and lovers, some of whom were men. So again, you kind of have this like, whoa, what's going on here with the King of England? You've got these Puritans, Calvinists that are running around. They really don't like this. They think this is immoral, the king's lifestyle and his male lovers. So this guy's going to get into some serious hot water. So the Parliament is increasingly strong and feisty under James I. They're a little bit stronger than they were under Henry VIII. They're wealthier, they're more educated and articulate. Many of them were lawyers. They were capitalists at this point. They want to make money, and they're willing to pay taxes in exchange for shared power. Okay? Willing to pay that, but they want the say. So this is a conflict over sovereignty. And a lot of the members of the House of Commons were now Calvinists or Puritans. So they really don't care for James I. All right? Get some of that down. Now, the next guy is Charles I. This is his son. So James I dies, old age, and now we switch to Charles I, the second Stuart King of England. And he is known as intelligent yet deceitful. Intelligent yet deceitful. He's even worse than James I. In fact, he was so angry at what had happened under his father that he at one point ruled without parliament for 11 years. 11 years he just dismissed the parliament and found other ways to raise taxes without going through parliament. And it's this thing called ship money. So he's raising money for England for himself without consulting with the parliament at all for 11 years. Ship money is where you tax the people on the coastal areas of England for national defense. You go, hey, you live on the coastal, on the shores. That's where all the threats are to invasion, where different navies might show up, like the Spanish Armada. We're going to tax all the people that live on the coastal areas, a special tax to pay for the army because they're the ones most susceptible to attack. This is an illegal tax, but it's used by the King of England to raise revenue without going through the Parliament, which is he's dismissed for 11 years because he wants to be an absolute monarch too. Got that? Get that down. James I, Charles I, always want to be absolute monarchs, okay? But they've got this Parliament in England that they're always going to have to contend with. All right, so religious issues now are also in play. Moving on to section C here. So let's just kind of review the three main religious groups of England are Catholics, a minority now because England is no longer Catholic, but there's still Catholics there, and some of these kings are going to act like Catholics. There's Puritans, that's the second minority group, Calvinists, Puritans, who really want to reform the church. The new Church of England is not Protestant enough for them. They want to be more like the guys down in Switzerland, like John Calvin, really strict, really pure, lots of rules, get rid of everything Catholic. Okay, and then there's the Anglicans, the Church of England. So there's these three groups, and the Anglicans are the majority. That's the kings, typically. That was Henry VIII, Elizabeth. This is the Church of England run by the king. So the Puritans, going into the notes now, are strict Calvinists. You know that. And they want to get rid of all Catholic images and practices, and they want to go even farther than Henry VIII did. And they got this work ethic. Remember the Protestant Calvinist work ethic, just like in the Netherlands? This really appeals to the members of the House of Commons, and many converted. So you have a lot of House of Commons. They're now Protestant, and they're now Puritan. So they're enemies of the king, because the king is either Anglican most of the time, but these kings are going to be kind of leaning toward Catholic again. So follow all that, hopefully. Let's move on. James I and Charles I appeared to many people in the Parliament to be returning England to Catholicism. They're sympathetic toward Catholics. And the main way that people believe this is because of this guy, William Laud, Archbishop of Canterbury, who the King of England, James and Charles, the Archbishop of Canterbury is sort of like the religious head of the Church of England. And they appointed him to be we're the real head, but you're really the, day to day, you're the leader of the Church of England. William Laud, the Archbishop of Canterbury. He acts like a Catholic, Archbishop of Canterbury, and the kings support this guy. And so he brings back Catholic ceremonies and liturgy and, different practices. And so the people of England and the Parliament specifically are freaked out. Elaborate religious ceremonies that look like Catholicism. Okay, that William Laud establishes this thing called the Court of High Commission, which is basically like an inquisition that investigates people for any misbehavior toward the church. It's a church court. So this doesn't sit well with Puritans at all. William Laud instituted a standardized prayer book where no matter where you go in England, any church service, you're going to say the same prayers in the church service, and it sounds like Catholic prayers. So the religious liberties are being whittled away here by Archbishop Laud. So up in Scotland, there's a rebellion in 1640 among Scottish Puritans. Scotland is part of England here. Remember, they're Presbyterian up in Scotland. Scottish Puritans, Calvinists, also known as Presbyterians. Okay, they are enraged at this new direction that the country's going, and they rebel by military action. And the king, who's Charles I, has been ruling without Parliament for 11 years, and he's been getting by with ship money. But now he's got a huge rebellion to put down, and he has to call Parliament back into session to deal with this with this rebellion among the Scots. Follow that. Yes. Here's Charles I again. The people that painted him always thought he was deceptive, so they'd paint him with three faces, like, who is he today? He's duplicitous. He's not just two-faced, he's three-faced. So this is how people thought of Charles I, not favorably. So when the Parliament comes back into session in 1640, okay, they're not going to go away. They're going to be called the Long Parliament because they refused to disband for 20 straight years because of what happened under Charles I, when they were away for 11 years. So the Long Parliament goes, okay, we'll come back into session. We'll give you some of the money you need, but here's the terms. They're going to limit the power of the monarch. Okay? Limit the power of the monarch. 2, the Parliament wants control of the army away from the king. All right, we're going to help put down this rebellion, but the Parliament controls the military of England, they say. They impeached William Laud, so he's out. The Catholic alike leader of the church they hated so much, he's out. And they passed they got rid of the Court of High Commission, that Inquisition-like thing. And then they passed what's called the Triennial Act. This says Parliament must meet at least once every 3 years. You cannot dismiss us for 11. We come into session every 3 years minimum. And in this case, this long parliament is 20 years without any break in the action. Then, to make matters worse, an Irish rebellion breaks out in Ireland, because Ireland has been ruled brutally by England for centuries at this point. The English have tried to impose Protestant faith on Ireland. The Irish are Catholic. They don't want that. So there's sort of this side issue happening for centuries in Ireland. And once they heard of the Scottish revolt, they go, this is a great time to rebel. England is in chaos. So the Irish people rebel. And now you have two rebellions on your hands, and you're Charles I of England. Parliament did not let Charles control the army or give him enough tax revenue to fight either of these two rebellions. So here's where the linchpin here. Charles I raised his own army, a separate army, against the Parliament to put down the two rebellions. So now there's an army that's the Parliament's army, the regular army of England, that was always been there. And now the king's like, if the Parliament doesn't allow me to fight my wars or give me the money to do it, I'm going to make a second army that I recruit that's loyal to me. Now you have two armies in England, one loyal to the king, one loyal to the Parliament. And now we have trouble. We're going to have a civil war in England. Between 1642 and 1649, there's this thing called the English Civil War because of all the issues we just talked about. And it's the king and the Parliament. All right, it's fought to decide the future of England. Who is going to be sovereign, the king or the Parliament? Okay, so this thing blows up. Still, rebellions are happening. The two rebellions are still underway, and now there's this full civil war in England. The army of the king is known as the Cavaliers. Cavaliers, got that? That's his own little new private army. And then there's the Parliament's army, nicknamed the Roundheads. Cavaliers and Roundheads. These are the two sides of the war. Think, Union and Confederacy, like our Civil War. The Puritan Parliament, the army of the Parliament, the regular traditional army of England is the Roundheads. So who wins the English Civil War after 7 years? It's the armies of Parliament. The Roundheads won the English Civil War. Okay? There was lots of fighting. The main military leader, actually, is this guy named Oliver Cromwell, who fights for the Parliament. He's the leader of the Roundheads. And his army is called the New Model Army. He's this really brilliant military leader who tries all these new strategies, and they work. So Cromwell, big guy. We'll know a lot more about him in the next set of notes. So they win. Cromwell, in the midst of the Civil War in England, got rid of everyone in the Parliament of England that wasn't loyal to him. So there were some, supporters of the king, of course, in Parliament, a minority. There were some Catholics in Parliament. Everyone's out. It's called the Pride's Purge. He and this other guy named Pride, that was his last name, go into the Parliament, literally, and get rid of, at gunpoint, all of the members of Parliament who are not loyal to them. And what's left behind is called the Rump Parliament. The backside, the rump, what's left. And these are now it's sort of like an illegal parliament because he's dismissed everybody, but it's on his side. So this is all political changes happening during the English Civil War. Cromwell and his army captured Charles I in the midst of the English Civil War, and they put him on trial for treason in 1649. And famous thing, this is a really huge moment in history, famous time. And they declared him guilty. You have raised an army against your people, against the legal army of Parliament. You have committed treason, and the sentence for treason is death. And so in 1649, in downtown London, at a building called Whitehall, which is this government banquet facility down there, right next to the English Parliament, where it is held today still, they executed Charles I for treason, beheaded him with an axe, and the word is regicide, where you kill a king. It's like homicide, you kill a fellow man, and infanticide is when people have killed children. And now you have regicide, the murder or the killing of a king. And it was done legally. He had a trial, but this is a big deal. So the Stuart King of England, Charles I, is dead. And we're going to pause here, and England is now in a complete state of chaos and flux. And they're going to enter this new phase of history in our next set of notes.